My name is Kate Morrison. I am 33 years old, and the cruelest thing my mother ever said to me fit inside 9 words. I had spent 5 years on fertility clinic waiting lists, 5 years of blood draws and hormone injections and phone calls that always ended the same way. Then I got pregnant. I stood at my mother's dining room table, 24 relatives around Barbara Morrison's good china, and I said the sentence I had rehearsed in the car for 35 minutes. I'm pregnant. My mother set down her fork. Let's hope this one is smarter than you. My sister Caroline laughed into her napkin. My father Frank reached for his water glass and said nothing. I looked across the table at my husband Owen. He nodded once. I reached into my coat pocket, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and stood up. It was a letter my specialist had written for me. 3 paragraphs, plain English, no medical language. By the 3rd sentence, my mother was crying, but here is what none of them expected. By the time I sat back down, every person at that table understood exactly who had caused what. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what they did. I work in medical records at Mercy Regional Hospital in Charlotte, not the visible kind of hospital work. I do not wear a badge that impresses anyone at dinner parties. I sit in a basement office and I read patient files until they tell me what went wrong. Coding errors, missing documentation, duplicate records that cost patients their coverage. I find the thing that should not be there, and I find the thing that should be there and is not. The job requires patience and precision and a tolerance for being the person nobody thinks to thank. Those happen to be the 3 things the Morrison family raised me to be good at, without ever crediting me for them. My mother Barbara taught Sunday school for 22 years and ran the church auxiliary and believed that a woman's worth was best demonstrated through visible achievement and proper presentation. My father Frank sold insurance and came home at 6:15 and sat in the same chair every evening and said approximately nothing. My sister Caroline was the headline of every family occasion. Pre-med at Chapel Hill, medical degree from Duke, residency at Carolina's Medical, board-certified OBGYN by 31, partner track at a women's health practice by 34. Caroline was the story Barbara told at every dinner table, every church gathering, every conversation with anyone who would stay still long enough to hear it. And then there was me, Kate, who worked with files. Barbara's explanation of my career at family gatherings had evolved over the years, from she works at the hospital to she does something with records, to simply she is in healthcare, which was technically accurate and practically invisible, which was how Barbara preferred me. Daniel found me at a hospital fundraiser when I was 26. He builds custom furniture, mostly dining tables and bookshelves for families who want something that will last. And he had come with a colleague who sat on the hospital board. We talked for 2 hours in a corner of the room about grain, direction and data integrity, and how both require patience and attention to things other people skip past. He proposed on a Sunday morning over coffee at the kitchen table he had built himself. Not a performance, just a question asked by a man who wanted the answer. We bought a small house near Freedom Park. He built the dining table, and for 2 years before the clinics and the waiting and the injections, that table felt like everything. The label started in 2nd grade. I struggled with reading. Letters moved around on the page in ways I could not explain. And nobody tested me for anything. Because Barbara was a Sunday school teacher who believed difficulty was a character issue rather than a neurological one. Parent-teacher night, 2nd grade. Mrs. Hollis had put my worksheet on the board with a red comment at the top. Barbara took it down before anyone else could see it. She folded it into her purse. In the car on the way home, loud enough for Carolyn in the back seat to hear, she said, honestly, how are you, my daughter? That sentence worked like a brand. It pressed itself into every report card, and every family Christmas, and every dinner where Caroline recited her academic achievements. And I passed the bread. By the time I finished my associate degree in health information management, summa cum laude, not that anyone asked, the Morrison family verdict was sealed. Kate was sweet. Kate worked hard. Kate was not the smart one. Carolyn never missed an opening. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, she poured herself a 2nd glass of wine and smiled at me across the table. Kate reads other people's paperwork, she told my cousin's husband. I read errors. Barbara laughed. Frank reached for the rolls. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 4 minutes counting the tiles on the floor. Because counting was the thing that kept me from saying something that could not be taken back, what none of them ever looked at. Because looking would have required revising the story they had all agreed on. Was that the girl who struggled with reading in second grade had spent 15 years learning to find what everyone else overlooked. I was never the slow one. I was the quiet one. In my family, those two things sounded exactly the same. When I was 9 years old, I found something I was not supposed to find. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. Barbara was at a church committee meeting. Frank was at work. Caroline was at volleyball practice. I was doing homework at the kitchen table, and I needed a pen. I went to Barbara's study to look in her desk. The top 2 drawers were unlocked. The third one was not. It had a small brass lock, the kind that comes with a key on a thin metal ring. I had never noticed that lock before. I tried the top 2 drawers again, found a pen, went back to my homework, but the locked drawer stayed in my mind, the way locked things stay. The following week I was in the study looking for scissors, and I noticed the key ring on Barbara's hook had a small brass key I'd never paid attention to. I took it down. I carried it to the desk. I fitted into the lock. The drawer opened. Inside, a white envelope sealed. My mother's handwriting on the front. One word, private. I had one hand on the envelope. When Barbara appeared in the doorway, I did not hear her come down the hall. She crossed the room in 4 steps and took the envelope from my hand so quickly I felt the paper edge catch my finger. Do not ever open that drawer. She did not raise her voce. Barbara Morrison did not yell. She used a voice that was quieter than yelling and more final. She locked the drawer. She put the key back on the hook. She looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then she went back to the kitchen. I asked Caroline about it once, years later. In the way you ask about things you are pretending not to care about. She shrugged. Mom's personal stuff. Stop being nosy. I was 9. I would not open that drawer for 24 more years. But the image of that white envelope, sealed, with the single word private across the front, stayed with me the way certain things stay, pressed into memory, waiting for the sentence it belonged in. Owen wanted me to tell someone, not Barbara. He understood better than to suggest that. But someone, a friend, a counselor, anyone who could help carry the weight I kept folding neatly into the back of my mind like files in a cabinet nobody opened. You do not have to manage this alone. He said it one evening while I was organizing injection supplies into labeled bags on the bathroom counter. He meant love. He meant support. He meant the thing I had spent 29 years believing had conditions attached. I told him I was fine. He went to the workshop and sanded a chair for 2 hours because that is what Owen does with worry. He works it into wood. The trying started quietly. Then it got loud in ways that only I could hear. The first year was just calendar tracking and basic testing. The second brought a specialist referral. The third brought the first round of injections. And the first time Owen held my hand while a technician performed an ultrasound and neither of us spoke. I lost the first pregnancy at 8 weeks. I was at work. I felt something change at my desk, and I drove myself to urgent care because I did not want to inconvenience anyone. The second loss came at 10 weeks. The third at 7. Each time the clinic used the same phrase. Unexplained recurrent loss. I wrote it on a sticky note once and looked at it the way I look at a coding error I cannot trace. A variable missing its source. I never told my family. Not any of it. I told Owen and my friend Denise from the records department and the intake nurse at the clinic who remembered my name by the 3rd visit. But I did not tell Barbara. I did not tell Caroline. I did not tell Frank because I already knew what each of them would say. Barbara would find a way to connect it to something I was doing wrong. Caroline would use her professional voice and the word unfortunately in a sentence that also contained the words your age. Frank would reach for his water glass, so I carried it alone. The appointments, the injections, the 6 in the morning blood draws that left bruises at the crook of my elbow. I wore long sleeves to Sunday dinners for 3 years. I swallowed grief the way some people swallow tap water, quietly, constantly, without noticing how thirsty I had become. Barbara called on a Wednesday afternoon. She did not ask how I was. She never did. She asked if I was still going to those appointments. I told her I was seeing a new specialist. A pause, then, Kate, this is becoming embarrassing. Not heartbreaking. Not difficult. Not worth a conversation. Embarrassing. Like a stain on her tablecloth she would have to explain to guests. Some women are just not built for it. She added it the way she added everything final, flat, declarative, the way she used to mark wrong answers without looking up from her pen. That is not a failure. It is just how some bodies are. I held the phone against my ear and let the sentence settle. Just how some bodies are. Said by the woman who had spent 3 years suggesting I try yoga and cut out caffeine and think more positively. Said by the woman who had never once in 5 years asked me a direct question about my health. I wanted to tell her that a specialist had just suggested there might be a real cause. A medical cause. With a name. Instead, I said, "I will think about it, Mom." And I hung up. Owen was in the kitchen. He had heard my side. He did not say anything. He put a glass of water on the counter and went back to the workshop. That night I lay in bed and counted, not tiles, the number of times in my adult life Barbara Morrison had asked me a genuine question about my health. I reached 5. 4 were about a sinus infection. 1 was about a mole on my shoulder. 0 were about the 5 years I had spent trying to become a mother. 0. My regular doctor referred me to a specialist named Dr. Renata Hale. She ran a recurrent pregnancy loss clinic on the 4th floor of Mercy Regional, the same hospital where I worked. 3 floors above my office. Dr. Hale was 51. Direct. She had 0 interest in telling me to relax and try again. At our first appointment, she pulled up my chart, looked at the 3 losses listed on my intake form, and said a sentence no one in my family had ever said to me. "This might not be your fault." She ordered a full genetic workup, karyotype analysis, thrombophilia panel, hormonal cascade, the kind of testing that looks for the reason beneath the reason. I sat in her office chair and felt something I had not felt in 4 years. Not hope. I had been too careful with hope for too long. Something older and more reliable. Curiosity, the same instinct that made me good at my job. Somewhere in my own blood, there was a number everyone had missed. And I was going to find it. I started reading medical literature the way I read hospital records. Slowly. Systematically. Looking for the variable nobody had isolated. Balanced translocations, inversions, thrombophilia cascades. I built a private spreadsheet with columns for genetic markers and recurrence rates. Owen would come to bed at 11 and find me with the laptop on my knees and 3 browser tabs open. "You are doing the control thing again." He said it gently, I know, but he did not ask me to stop, because he understood that this time the controlling was aimed at something real. I told Caroline about the genetic workup during a phone call, casually, almost as an aside. "The way you mention a dentist appointment." Her response was immediate. "Kate, stop playing doctor. You are overthinking this." She used her professional voice, the one she reserved for patients she had already decided not to take seriously. "Sometimes these things just happen. Give your body time." My body had been trying for 5 years. Carolyn had spent 8 years in medical school and residency. She had delivered other people's babies for a living. She had the training and the access and the knowledge, and in 5 years, she had never once suggested her own sister get tested for a chromosomal cause. Not once had she offered to look at my labs or said the word karyotype over Sunday dinner. She just had not had the interest. The irony would find her later. For now, I hung up and opened a new tab. Dr. Hale called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon. She had my karyotype results on her screen and a cup of coffee she had not touched. "We found something," she said. She turned the monitor toward me. A diagram of chromosomes, mine, arranged in pairs. 2 of them had segments exchanged. "You carry a balanced reciprocal translocation. Chromosomes 4 and 9, she explained it plainly. My chromosomes were structurally rearranged, but completely functional in my own body. The problem appeared during reproduction. When my eggs formed, the translocation created a high probability of genetically unbalanced embryos. Embryos with too much or too little genetic material to survive a pregnancy. That was why I had lost 3 pregnancies. Not because I had waited too long, not because I was stressed or not eating correctly or not thinking positively enough or not relaxing on the beach the way Barbara had suggested at Easter. Because of a microscopic rearrangement in my DNA that had been there since before I was born. I sat very still. I am good at sitting still. "Is there a path forward?" I asked. Dr. Hale nodded. "Pre-implantation genetic testing. PGTM. They could screen embryos during IVF and select only those with balanced or normal chromosomes. The success rates were real and measurable. Not a guess. Not a prayer. A number." I understood numbers. "One more thing," Dr. Hale said. She set her pen down. "This type of translocation is almost always inherited from a parent." She let that sit. "I would recommend testing both your parents if that is possible." I stared at the chromosome diagram on her screen. 2 segments exchanged, invisible to the naked eye. Passed down through a family the way certain things are passed down. Without announcement, without explanation. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 25 minutes after that appointment. Engine off. Hands on the wheel. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I tried to picture asking Barbara Morrison to submit to a blood draw so we could determine whether she had passed a chromosomal rearrangement to her daughter. I tried to hear her voice, the tightening around the mouth. There is nothing wrong with me, or worse. Stop looking for someone to blame. Dr. Hale had said translocations were common. 1 in 500 people carried one. Most never knew because it only became visible through recurrent loss or infertility. A person could live an entire life, raise children, teach Sunday school for 22 years, host Christmas dinner, and never realize they carried the rearrangement that had cost their daughter 5 years of grief. Unless they had lost pregnancies themselves. Unless there were losses no one had spoken of. I thought about the locked drawer, the white envelope, the single word private in Barbara's handwriting. I did not drive home. I drove to Owen's workshop. He was finishing a set of bookshelves, wood shavings on his forearms. I told him everything. The translocation, the PGT path, the inheritance pattern. He set down his plane. It was never you. 4 words, said the way Dr. Hale had said them. Like a fact, like something that had always been true and simply needed to be spoken. Barbara asked me to help her sort through the study. She was reorganizing, donating old teaching materials. The church auxiliary had offered to take her files for the archive. It was a Saturday in March. Caroline was working. Of course she was. So it was just Barbara and me in a room we had never been comfortable in together, carrying boxes of old Sunday school curricula and outdated ministry newsletters to the front hallway. Barbara directed from the doorway, "That stack goes to the church. That one is recycling. Do not mix them up." I moved through the room in silence. I was taking a box to the hallway when I heard a sound from behind the desk. Barbara had opened the bottom drawer. Not the locked one. The filing drawer. She was pulling out folders with her back to me. The key ring was on the desk. The small brass key was on it. I looked at it. I looked at Barbara's back. I picked up the key ring and walked to the desk. I turned the key in the lock. The drawer opened. The white envelope was still there. Private. Same handwriting. Same seal. Barbara was still at the filing drawer. I lifted the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. I opened it. Inside, 4 items. A hospital discharge summary dated November 1988. A discharge summary dated March 1990. A birth and death certificate dated September 1991. Baby boy, Morrison, 1 day old. And a small photograph. A newborn in a hospital blanket, eyes closed. A card clipped to the photograph, in Barbara's handwriting. Thomas. I held the photograph and read the name. Thomas. I had a brother. A brother who had lived one day and been named and photographed and then placed in a sealed envelope in a locked drawer in a study where nobody was allowed to look. September 1991. Barbara would have been 31. Caroline was 4. I was not yet born. Nobody had ever said his name. Not at Christmas. Not at Thanksgiving. Not in the thousands of hours I had spent at that dining table, watching my mother perform the role of a woman with 2 daughters and a husband and a faith and nothing else requiring acknowledgement. I looked at the 2 discharge summaries from 1988 and 1990, both early, both listed as spontaneous pregnancy loss. She had lost at least 2 pregnancies before Thomas, then me. I put everything back in the envelope. I sealed it as well as I could. I put it back in the drawer. I locked it. I put the key back on the ring. I set the ring on the desk. I picked up another box of newsletters. I carried it to the hallway. I helped my mother finish the sorting. I drove home in complete silence with my hands at 10 and 2. But the question was already forming. The way questions form for me. Not as an emotion. As a variable with a missing source. I called Aunt Patty the next morning. Patricia Graves. Barbara's younger sister. The Morrison sibling who brought sweet potato pie to family dinners and never once implied I should be doing something different with my life. She was the one person in my extended family who listened instead of announced. I drove to her house in Concord. She made sweet tea and set 2 glasses on her kitchen table and waited. I did not know how to ask, so I just said it. Who was Thomas? Patty put her glass down carefully, like she was placing something fragile on a hard surface. Your mother told you. No. I found the envelope. She exhaled. Not a sigh. Something held for a long time. Thomas was your brother. He lived one day. The cord was wrapped. That was what they told her. But your mother never fully believed that explanation. She was quiet for a moment, and before him there were others. Two that I know of, early, before Caroline even. Your mother never carried those ones long enough to name. I sat with that. 2 early losses. Then Caroline, who survived. Then Thomas, who did not. Then me. She never talked about it. Patty shook her head. Your mother never grieved out loud. So she grieved at you. She said it simply, without cruelty, like someone explaining a mechanism they had watched operate for 30 years and never been able to stop. Barbara had sealed Thomas in a locked drawer and built a life on top of him. A life where one daughter was exceptional and the other was a category. And the envelope stayed locked. I thanked Patty. I drove home. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the chromosome diagram Dr. Hale had shown me. 2 segments exchanged. Inherited from a parent. The variable I had been looking for had a location, and the location was in a locked drawer in my mother's study. Here is what I knew by that Sunday evening. Barbara had lost at least 2 pregnancies in 1988 and 1990. She had lost Thomas in 1991 at 1 day old. I carried a balanced reciprocal translocation on chromosomes 4 and 9 that caused recurrent pregnancy loss. That translocation was inherited most commonly from the mother. I did not need a medical degree to connect those points. I needed what I had always been trained to be good at, finding the variable nobody wanted to look at. Barbara likely carried the same rearrangement. She had probably carried it her entire life. Her losses in the late 1980s, Thomas in 1991, they fit the exact clinical pattern Dr. Hale had described. Unbalanced embryos, pregnancies that could not sustain, all from the same invisible source passed from mother to daughter to the next generation of loss. And she had never told me. She had watched me struggle for 5 years. She had heard me deflect questions at dinner and arrive at holidays with dark circles under my eyes and long sleeves over bruised arms. She knew what pregnancy loss looked like. She had lived it. And instead of saying, I understand, or this happened to me too, or even I am sorry, she had said, some women are just not built for it. I could have been angry. The data supported anger entirely, but anger is imprecise. It misfiles things, blurs the columns that need to be exact. So instead I sat at my desk and drafted a timeline. Barbara's losses, Thomas, my own losses, the translocation, the PGT IVF path. And at the end of the timeline I wrote 2 words. Doctor's letter. I was going to ask Dr. Hale to write it. 3 paragraphs. Plain English. Short enough to read at a dinner table. We started PGT IVF the following month. The process was precise and exhausting and exactly the kind of thing I was built for. Hormone protocol, egg retrieval, fertilization. Then the part that made it different from everything before. Genetic screening of every embryo. Of the 7 embryos that developed, 2 came back with normal chromosomes. 2 chances. The clearest odds I had ever been given. Dr. Hale and I sat in her office after the results came back. I asked her for something she had never been asked before. I need you to write a letter. She looked at me over her glasses. What kind of letter? The kind that explains my diagnosis in language my mother can understand. The cause of my losses. Where the condition came from. Dr. Hale was quiet for a moment. She picked up her legal pad. How long? 3 paragraphs. She wrote it that week. I read it once in her office. I folded it into thirds. I put it in the coat pocket I would wear to the next family dinner. I did not read it again. I knew every sentence. Paragraph 1, the pregnancy. Paragraph 2, the translocation diagnosis and what it had caused. Paragraph 3, the inheritance pattern, that this condition passes through the maternal line. 3 paragraphs. Each one a sentence Barbara Morrison had spent 30 years ensuring would never be said out loud at her table. The first transfer did not implant. I updated my spreadsheet, booked the second appointment, told nobody. The second transfer took. 2 weeks later, a blood test confirmed what 5 years of trying had never produced. A viable pregnancy. HCG levels rising and doubling every 48 hours, exactly as the textbook described. Owen was standing in the kitchen when I told him. He was holding a dish towel. He set it on the counter. He put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then he said 2 words. Then it worked. The truest sentence either of us had spoken in years. We passed 8 weeks, then 10, then 13. Each milestone felt like crossing a bridge that had held for other people, but never for me. At 15 weeks, Dr. Hale said the words I had stopped believing I would hear. This pregnancy is progressing normally. I sat in her office and said thank you, and walked to my car and sat in the parking garage with the engine off, and for the first time in 5 years, I let myself think the word daughter. I did not tell my family, not yet. Owen asked once over dinner, gently, "When are you going to call your mother?" I cut a piece of chicken and chewed it carefully. "When I am ready," he nodded. He did not push. He understood that ready was not a simple word for me. It did not mean a gift box or a cute announcement. It meant I had decided exactly how much of myself I was willing to place in front of people who had spent 30 years finding ways to make it smaller. I went to Sunday dinners. I wore loose shirts. I ate whatever Barbara served and deflected questions about work and smiled when Caroline described her patient outcomes and said nothing about the daughter growing inside me who was for the first time growing correctly. 16 weeks, 1820. The anatomy scan showed a healthy girl. I saw her spine on the screen, each vertebra like a pearl on a thread. And I thought, you are not going to sit at that table and feel the way I felt. I kept the ultrasound photograph in my wallet behind my hospital badge. When Barbara commented on my weight at a Sunday dinner, her eyes moving over me with the practiced measurement of a woman who had been assessing her daughters since birth, I smiled and said I had been eating more at work. Caroline glanced at me for half a second. Something moved behind her eyes I could not place. Not suspicion. Something quieter, like recognition of something she did not want to examine. She looked away quickly. I filed it. The dinner invitation came 3 weeks later. Caroline had made partner at her women's health practice. Barbara was hosting a celebration dinner. 26 relatives. The good china. Saturday evening at 7. A double occasion. Caroline's partnership. And Barbara was retiring from the church auxiliary after 22 years. I read the invitation at my kitchen table. I looked at the coat hanging by the door. The letter was in the right pocket. It had been there for 11 weeks. I put the invitation on the counter next to my keys. I looked at Owen across the kitchen. He was reading. He looked up. "I need you to nod when I look at you." He closed his book. "I will be there." He said it the same way he said everything that mattered, like a fact. The morning of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror and buttoned my coat. I was 24 weeks. The pregnancy was visible now, too far along to conceal. I reached into the right pocket and felt the letter. It had been folded into thirds since the day Dr. Hale handed it to me. The paper was soft at the creases from the number of times I had touched it without opening it. I did not need to open it. I knew every word. I practiced reading it in the car on the way to my parents' house until my voice stopped catching on the third paragraph. I was not going to raise my voice. I was just going to read. Owen sat beside me in the passenger seat. He did not ask if I was sure. He had asked that 3 weeks earlier, and I had answered him. He understood that tonight was not about anger. It was about accuracy, the kind that does not leave room for reinterpretation. Barbara's house smelled like roast chicken and the particular floral air freshener she had used since I was 7. The dining room had been set for 26. The good china, white with a pale blue border, used at Christmas and Easter and significant celebrations. Real cloth napkins, a centerpiece of white roses because Barbara believed flowers belonged at occasions that deserved marking. The guest list: Frank, Caroline, her husband Greg, Aunt Patty, Uncle David, 4 cousins, 3 in-laws, 2 of Barbara's closest friends from the auxiliary, and a scattering of relatives I saw twice a year and who knew me primarily as Caroline's quieter sister. My seat was between Uncle David and Barbara's friend Margaret, which told me exactly where I placed in my mother's seating arrangement, between someone who would not talk to me and someone who would not notice me. Owen sat directly across the table. He had worn his good jacket. He looked at me when we sat down. A small nod. Not the nod, just "I am here." The room was warm. Voices layered over each other. Caroline accepting congratulations. Barbara narrating the history of the church auxiliary to anyone within reach. Frank opening a second bottle of wine with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned not to participate in conversations he could not redirect. I sat in my chair with my coat on the back of it and the letter in the right pocket, and I ate my salad, and I listened to my family celebrate the 2 women they had always been proud of. The locked drawer was 15 feet from where I sat. Behind it, the sealed envelope. Thomas's photograph. His one-day life folded into a white envelope with the word private across the front. Everything in that house was exactly where Barbara had placed it, including me. Barbara tapped her glass at 8 o'clock. The room quieted. She stood at the head of the table in her cream blouse and the pearl earrings she wore to church and looked out over her family with the expression of a woman who had arranged every detail and expected every detail to hold. I want to thank you all for being here. 22 years with the church auxiliary, and I can finally say I am handing it to someone younger. Warm laughter. She turned to Caroline, and to my daughter, my Caroline, who has just made partner at Ridgeline Women's Health. We always knew you would get there. She raised her glass. The table followed. Caroline smiled. Greg touched her shoulder. Patty raised her glass. Frank poured more wine. I watched from my assigned seat, my hand resting on the napkin in my lap. This was the pattern. Barbara would toast Caroline. The room would respond. Then dessert would arrive, and the evening would close into small talk and compliments until everyone went home and the good china went back into the cabinet. That was how it always went. The celebration. The roles. The same script every time. Caroline at center. Kate in the margin. Except tonight I had a coat on the back of my chair with a letter in the pocket, and a 24-week-old daughter who had never heard anyone call her mother not enough. Daniel caught my eye across the table. His hands were resting on the placemat. Steady. I took a breath. I set my napkin on the table. I stood up. 26 faces turned toward me, and I said the sentence I had rehearsed in the car for 35 minutes. I'm pregnant. The table went quiet, the real kind of quiet. Not the pause between a toast and applause. The kind where forks stop moving and glasses settle and you can hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. 26 people looked at me. I looked at my mother. Barbara's face moved through the recalibration I had watched my entire life. The quick sort behind the eyes where she categorized what she had just heard into the columns she kept for me. Inconvenience, embarrassment, irrelevance. It took her 3 seconds. She picked up her wine glass. Well, let's hope this one is smarter than you. 9 words. The same cadence she had used on report cards and spelling tests. The same dismissal. The same message underneath it. Whatever you do, Kate, it will not be enough. Caroline was sitting 2 seats to Barbara's left. She raised her napkin to her mouth, but not fast enough to cover the smile. At least now I won't be the only one who has to manage her expectations. She said it toward Barbara. Like I was not in the room, like my daughter was already a category. Frank reached for his water glass. He did not look up. 26 relatives. Not one of them spoke. Patty had her hand flat on the table. Uncle David stared at his plate. Margaret cleared her throat and said nothing. The room waited for me to sit back down, to fold myself into the margin the way I always had. I looked across the table at Owen. His hands were still. His eyes were steady. He nodded. I did not sit down. I reached behind me and put my hand into my coat pocket. The letter was there, soft at the folds. I had carried it for 11 weeks. I pulled it out, unfolded it. The room watched. I could feel 26 people deciding whether this was a scene or a statement. Barbara's face had shifted, not to concern, to the controlled alarm of a woman who suspects the script is changing and has not been given the new pages. What is that? Her voice was sharp, the voice she had used when I reached for the locked drawer at 9 years old. It is a letter, I said. My voice was level. I had practiced that. From my specialist, Dr. Renata Hale. She runs the Recurrent Pregnancy Loss Clinic at Mercy Regional. The words recurrent pregnancy loss landed on the table like something placed with intention. Caroline's smile disappeared. Frank put down his glass. I spent 5 years trying to have a baby, I said. I lost 3 pregnancies. I never told any of you because I already knew what you would say. I looked at my mother. I know what you just said. Barbara opened her mouth. I held up one hand. The same hand she had taken the envelope from when I was 9 years old, standing at her desk. I would like to read this letter now, all of it, and then I will sit down. The room was completely still. Owen's hands rested on the placemat, steady as the table he had built for our kitchen. I looked at the first line of the letter. I read, Dear Kate, I am writing this letter at your request so that your family may understand your medical history and your current pregnancy. Your pregnancy is healthy and progressing normally at 24 weeks. Your daughter is developing on schedule and all clinical indicators are strong. I paused, not for effect, for breath. I continued. Over the past 5 years, you have experienced 3 pregnancy losses, Following comprehensive genetic testing, we identified the cause. You carry a balanced reciprocal translocation involving chromosomes 4 and 9. This is a chromosomal rearrangement that does not affect your own health, but creates a high probability of genetically unbalanced embryos during reproduction. This is not caused by stress, timing, diet, age, or personal behavior. It is a documented medical condition that has been present in your genetic material since birth. I heard someone exhale. I did not look up. I read the third paragraph. This type of translocation is inherited. It passes from parent to child through the maternal line. Based on your family history, including documented pregnancy losses in the preceding generation, the clinical evidence strongly indicates you inherited this condition from your mother. I stopped reading. I did not need to say anything after that sentence. The sentence did what sentences do when they carry 30 years of silence. It placed itself in the center of the room and waited for everyone to look at it. Barbara looked at it. Her face changed. Not the recalibration I had watched 1,000 times. Something underneath that. Something old and terrified and raw, like the surface of a wall when the plaster has finally given way. Her mouth opened. No sound came. Then her eyes filled. Not the composed tears she produced at church services and retirement gatherings. The other kind. The kind that come from the place you have sealed for so long you forgot the door was there. By the third sentence, my mother was crying. The table understood before Barbara did. You could watch it move through them. Patty first, then David, then the cousins. The slow recognition of what passes through the maternal line actually meant. It meant Barbara carried it. It meant Barbara's losses in the late 1980s. Thomas in 1991. 1 day old and sealed in an envelope. They had the same invisible source, passed from mother to daughter to the next generation of grief. And she had never said a word. Barbara's hands were shaking on the tablecloth. You do not understand. Her voice cracked. I lost. The name she had not said in 31 years was caught in her throat. Patty put her hand on her sister's arm. Tell her, Barbara. Tell the truth for once. Barbara pressed both palms over her eyes. I did not know. I did not know it could be passed. I did not know that was what. She was talking to the table, to the ceiling, to the son she had placed in a sealed envelope and never spoken of again. Caroline sat completely still. The color had left her face entirely. She was a board-certified OB/GYN. She had spent 8 years in medical training and 4 years delivering other women's babies. And she had never once considered that her own sister's recurrent losses might have a chromosomal origin. She had not asked. She had not offered to look. She had laughed. Frank stared at his plate. His hand stayed at his side. For the first time in my memory, he did not reach for his glass. I folded the letter. 3 creases. The same way I had folded it 11 weeks earlier in Dr. Hale's office. I put it back in my coat pocket. I did not say you passed this to me. I did not say you could have warned me. I did not say Thomas. I did not say any of the things a person has earned the right to say when they have been given permission to be cruel. Cruelty had always been their language. It had never been mine. Barbara was still crying, the kind of crying that empties a person in front of witnesses. Caroline was reaching for her water glass with a hand that was not entirely steady. Frank's jaw moved. Roger. Frank sat in the particular stillness of a man who knows the accounting of a situation has just been corrected and does not know what to do with the balance. I looked at my mother. I kept my voice at the level I use when I am reading a number that does not lie. She does not have to be the smart one. She just has to be loved. I placed my napkin on the table. Owen stood. He walked around to my side. He pulled out my chair. He put his hand on the small of my back. We walked to the front door. Behind us, Patty said something quiet I could not make out. Barbara said my name. I heard it. I did not turn around. Not because I was angry. Because I had said everything the letter had to say. And everything after that was hers to carry. Owen opened the car door. I sat down. He drove. We did not speak for the first 15 minutes. Then he said, You okay? Not yet. But I will be. He reached across and found my hand. Left it there. I looked out the window at Charlotte moving past. The hospital lights in the distance. 3 floors above my office. Dr. Hale's clinic. The place where someone had finally looked at the right variable. 3 weeks passed. Nobody called. Then Patty did. She left a voicemail. Kate, I want you to know you were right to say it. I should have said it years ago. She paused. Your mother is not okay, but that is not your job to fix. I saved the message. A cousin I barely knew texted. I never knew any of that. You were so brave. Caroline did not call the first week or the second. On the 19th day, a text arrived. Can we talk? I waited a day and wrote back. When you are ready to be honest, yes. Barbara tried once. Not a phone call. A letter, handwritten, 2 pages. The penmanship careful, because Barbara Morrison did not send careless letters even when she was falling apart. Most of it was about herself, about how hard it had been to lose Thomas, about how she had not had the language for grief in 1991, about how she had been afraid I would turn out like her, and how that fear had expressed itself in all the wrong directions. She did not use the word sorry. What she did write at the end was, I would like to meet my granddaughter. When you are ready. Owen read the letter. She is still making it about herself. I know. What do you want to do? I thought about it for 10 days. Then I wrote back. You can be in her life, but it starts with the truth. All of it, including Thomas's name. Barbara did not respond for 8 days. Then a single line arrived. His name was Thomas James Morrison. It was not an apology. It was not enough. But it was the first honest sentence my mother had written me in 33 years. And I decided that was a place to begin. She was born on a Wednesday in July at 7:18 in the morning. 6 pounds 11 ounces, Dr. Hale delivered her. Owen cut the cord. The nurse placed her on my chest, and she opened her eyes and looked at me with the unfocused attention of someone arriving somewhere new and taking stock of it. I held her, and I thought about the white envelope in the locked drawer. The brother I had never met. The 3 pregnancies that had ended before this one held. I thought about the outcome column in my spreadsheet that finally on this row read something other than negative. I thought about Barbara's hands trembling on the tablecloth. I kept the letter. Dr. Hale had given me the original when the story was finished. I put it in the cedar box, not hidden, not locked, on the shelf in my daughter's room where the morning light could reach it. Not as a record of cruelty, as a record of accuracy, of what it looks like when someone finally looks at the right variable and does not look away. I spent 33 years trying to be smart enough to earn a love that was never going to arrive on my terms. And it turned out the most precise thing I ever did was stop submitting evidence for a verdict that had already been decided. And just love her instead. I look at her in the morning light and I think about the woman who passed this condition down to me without knowing it and grieved it by making me smaller. I think about the brother sealed in a white envelope for 31 years. I think about the chromosome diagram on Dr. Hale's screen. 2 segments exchanged, present since before I was born, passed down like a piece of furniture nobody knew they were carrying. And I think about the spreadsheet, all those rows, all those outcomes that read negative, until the one that did not. Their verdict was never the data. It was just the story they needed to tell so they did not have to look at the truth. The truth had been in the numbers all along, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. That is my story. 5 years, 3 losses, 1 letter, and 3 sentences that finally said what 33 years of silence had buried. If you have ever been the one they decided about before you finished becoming, their verdict was never the truth. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.